Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for this afternoon's topic, Empathy in Design Thinking. I'm Kerry Brox from the Institute for Learning and Performance, your trusted learning and development industry partner. We currently have about 4,000 members that we support, or just over 4,000 in the Asia Pacific region, with an extensive range of benefits just to help them support and grow their business or their career. So just before I get to hand over to our presenter this afternoon, Leila, I just want to let you know that Bill Gerard, who's ILP's national advocate, will be wrapping up at the end and letting you know what some of the upcoming events are happening at ILP. So for now, this afternoon, it's my great pleasure to introduce Leila Saba. Leila is the Capability Development Facilitator for Western Power, who is basically supplies energy to the whole of Western Australia, so a community. So she's coming from us to us this afternoon from Perth. Her role there is around change and innovation, and she said earlier that she's living the dream and learning and development, so I share that with you. She is also ILP's regional advocate for us in WA. So Leila, thank you so much for this afternoon, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. As we continue, I think Kerry will continue to let more people in, so you'll have more and more members coming through in the first part. I wanted to kick off our time together by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are working and living, and extending that respect to elders past and present. It's something actually that we tend to forget when we're working online so much at the moment. As Kerry said, my name is Leila Saba. I'm based here in Perth, WA, so it is further away from the end of the day for me at the moment than it might be for a lot of yourselves who are 2 hours into the future. And I just wanted to correct a very small thing. I'm not the head of learning development or innovation. I work as a facilitator leading a lot of initiatives in that space. I don't want anyone to think that I make any groundbreaking decisions, but I certainly hope that I help people to do that. Now, for the moment, and as we wait for a few more people to come in, I thought we would start our session with a bit of a check-in. The topic today was empathy in design thinking. And rather than jumping straight into what might feel like a lesson, why don't we just take a moment and use the chat box to just switch off from whatever the last thing was that we were doing, and in whatever capacity you're comfortable sharing, there'll be no judgment, no commentary. Use the chat box, and I'll, if anyone needs help with that, I'll explain that in just a moment. And you can either choose a coloured heart or a one-word check-in, and I'll participate as well with this one. I particularly like this this approach because it really is just a check out of the last thing and let's check into this one and listen. So for those who haven't used the chat option in Zoom, there will be usually along the bottom of your screen, because it's generally at the top of, it's usually at the bottom of your screen. There should be an icon that says chat or looks like a little chat box. If you go in there, and some of you already messaged in there, we've got someone's coming to us live from Dumbledore's office, also in Perth. Hi Anita. We have, I won't say hi to all 40 people, but just scanning these messages, we've got someone who said welcome everyone. How do we use or choose coloured hearts? You don't have to. You can just pop the word of the colour into the chat box. Good question. Someone's recovering. I'll pop mine in. Fabulous, great. They don't always have to be amazing. Some of us might be feeling a bit the opposite, worried, anxious. No worries if you have to leave early. This will be available later. Blue, red, beautiful. Wow. Divergent. Thank you. Red for me. Needing a break. This won't be a heavy time. This is not a heavy session. So, A-okay, wonderful. Great, but exhausted. Lovely. Please continue doing that. And we can actually keep seeing those words coming through. So I like to, that's an example, by the way, of when we talk about empathy online, that's an example that I tend to do for every online meeting. So whereas in person, I might not do this at every meeting, with online meetings, particularly at the moment where we're all finding, there's a lot of people finding that we're just doing these back to back, it is important just to spend those few minutes at the beginning doing any kind of check-in. And for today, given that a lot of us don't necessarily know each other, I thought I'd go with a very safe check-in. So thank you very much for sharing. And it's good to see that there's a general overall positivity, and it's okay that when there isn't anyway. Thank you. So what are we going to do? What's our time together? I had a bit about me, but I think Kerry's kindly covered that. I know that the last online meetup was about professional presentation, and I hope that I'm not disgracing the messaging too much with my rather casual look. Working from home, it's a bit nippy, and so we'll forget that. But I like to keep the professionalism to the respect and the content that we'll be covering. What we will be looking at is what is design thinking. Not in detail. This is not a design thinking lesson. It's just a snapshot for any of you who've either not heard of it before or have heard of it here and there. So it'll just be a real skim of the surface around what it is. Then we'll also touch on what is empathy in design thinking. When we talk about empathy in design thinking, what is that? Then I'll open it up for a bit of a discussion. Welcome. Don't worry, anyone who's late. We're just warming up. And then we'll go into a bit of a discussion where I'll invite your input around why is it important for us to actually practice empathy in design, and particularly with this audience, we're mostly learning professionals. So I am making a bit of an assumption around who we may be designing for, or you know, what we might be designing. So we're sitting in that learning ambit. And then I'll share in the latter part, I'll share an example of, you know, how I've managed empathy online, a very recent example, very current, and with some very specific, a couple of specific things that I did and specific things that I learned. And once again, time permitting, we'll reopen it up for some sharing. I'd love to hear from a few people in the group as well. And I'll give Bill the last 5 minutes or so to tell us about what's coming up. Cool? At any point during this session, given that I can't see all your faces, there is another way to get attention, and that is at the bottom of your screen, you'll have a little icon that says reactions, and that allows you to wave or raise your hand or send a thumbs up. So if you do want to, if you can't find the chat box and you just want my attention, you can wave and I will see who it is, and I'll invite you to unmute yourself and speak up. So what is design thinking? This is a bit of a dictionary definition, and I've popped the reference in the slide because design thinking originated, well, in essence, design thinking's probably been around forever and ever, but in terms of a packaged or a little bit of an institutionalized approach to design thinking, it's been around for what, 10, 15 years, and a couple of organizations that have done this really well. The Stanford D School, and I'll write that in the chat, so if you want to copy paste that into any notes that you're taking. You can just look those up, look them up online, just a Google, and an organization called IDEO, which I've definitely typed into the chat because it could be written any way, pronounced like that. And what design thinking is really, it's a way to build stuff or create stuff that starts with the user in mind. And the dictionary definition, or one definition, is up there on the slide for you to read. I've highlighted understand users because design thinking has a few components to it, and when we talk about empathy, we're very much in that front end of the methodology, and it is very much around that understanding our users, and so I'll be talking to that as well. The method of design thinking is absolutely it's handy for any kind of creation, and I stand by this. I'm a bit of an advocate when it comes to the whole of design thinking. But the method is particularly helpful when we're tackling problems that have more unknown solutions. And I think it's really appropriate at the moment just to add to the cliches that are everywhere, but unfortunately it is actually that, is with the massive amount of uncertainty that we had going into the COVID-19 crisis, and the increased uncertainty as we're starting to very slowly come out of it, having a user-first approach to creating things could actually serve us quite well. If you hear background noise, there is some possible work going on in my building, so it shouldn't disturb us, but it just started about 15 minutes ago, which I thought was hilarious given that we've just kicked off. Now, you're not an L&D professional if you don't have some sort of colored diagram. I'm sorry this one doesn't have 4 quadrants, which is the general preference, but the design thinking process, I chose this particular image because it's probably one of the older and most loyal original images of the design thinking process. Like I mentioned at the beginning of a catch-up, I'm not running this session to teach you design thinking. One of the most exciting things about design thinking is that you learn it by doing it. Very much, you can't really read too much about design thinking until you've actually experienced it somehow. However, at a very sort of conceptual level, design thinking follows these hexagons or these pieces of the puzzle. I'm reluctant to call it a process because it really is not linear. Although, another little non-linear disclaimer is that with design thinking, we do often start with defining what we're trying to solve and really empathizing or working with our user. And that's what we'll focus in on shortly. But just a snapshot of design thinking, and I know from the names that I can see who are in attendance that a few of you are probably very familiar with this stuff, and a handful of you could teach me a thing or two. So like I said, I'm not here to explain every intricate detail, but just for those who may not have come across design thinking before, here's my understanding of, from my experience and from some reading, how design thinking works. I generally believe in starting with the empathy piece, where I really want to understand who I'm creating something for. And there's a lot of methodology around empathy. Today we'll be keeping it fairly conceptual and quite experiential, but when you get into the approaches around empathy, it's some really interesting stuff. But the gist of empathy is to understand our user deeply. Once we know our end users, the humans who will be using whatever it is we're creating, we want to really make sure that we're solving the right problem. And we look at framing, reframing, and this is where we sit within define. We make some assumptions, we keep our empathy hats on, and assuming a linearity, which is hardly ever the case, we can then move into what we call ideate. When I'd first heard of design thinking, I was like, why are they inventing words, really? That was my first thought. But ideation is effectively that whole piece around thinking crazy, thinking big, thinking outside of boundaries, without limitations, suspending judgment, and once again, moving into then the next piece where we build something. Now, as interesting as everything is in design thinking up to this point, if anyone has had experience with prototyping, it really is probably one of the most fun things you could do in design, where you make a rough and dirty version of whatever it is that you're creating. So if you're building websites, you could create a dummy page of whatever the site might be. If you're if you're building e-learning, that could even be the prototyping could be a paper version of what the online experience might be. A prototype could even be that you draw something up in the form of a cartoon strip, or we call it storyboarding, just to keep it, there's so much stuff in there. So you can probably hear my bias sits with empathy and prototyping. You're allowed to have favorite parts of design thinking. And then and a really important part of the whole flow is the testing, which once you've built something rough and dirty, the design thinking process is that you take that back to your users and you let them play with it, you let them break it, you let them give you feedback, you put your empathy hat back on if you took it off, and you iterate and you fix it, you build it. to the point where we get to that piece, which isn't quite the end, unless of course it's all over. But when we talk about assessment, it's really taking all that wild stuff, all that, you know, the prototype, the feedback, the insights, and this is where we go into business case. So to bring it back to reality or application, more likely, in terms of the job that I do, at the organization where I'm working, my job is to help people who work in the organization. I work internally, work their ideas and their initiatives and their projects from that very first bit where they've had that idea in the shower about, wouldn't this be great to create this first for our users, all the way through to business case, at which point we then hand over to, you know, the project management or whatever it might be. And that's design thinking. If anyone has burning questions, pop them into the chat box. I will assume, which is the opposite of empathy, I will assume that silence is a general acceptance and compliance, and I'll continue us through. Just check our timing. We're doing well. Lovely. So design thinking, empathy, and it all starts with the user. I hope everyone can see this image. This is one of my favorite images that conveys the opposite of user-centric or design that starts with our user. And you know, I've popped down the bottom there, what might be wrong with this image? You don't have to answer that question. It's probably a little bit rhetorical. However, some angles for approaching empathy in design, and this is really, I guess, high level concept for empathy in design, are that we approach from three sort of broad angles. So remembering that empathy in design is about understanding our user, we can observe our end users, and the example with this part could be that you sit yourself on a bench and you map out where people are walking from and to, and you watch their movements. You're really observing the use of this park. We can also walk alongside our end users. Now, that doesn't mean holding hands with strangers in the park to find out, you know, the path they take, but it actually means that immersion, or immersing yourself into that user's experience. So in terms of this particular image, that could look like and feel like, if you wanted to understand those users, that you walk through that park yourself. You walk through and you think deeply about where you're going, why you're going there, what you need to do, and you walk in the shoes of those end users. And another angle for approaching empathy in design is talking deeply with our end users. In my world, and I observe a lot in, I guess, the corporate world and the not-for-profit sector, we do tend to do a lot more of this third one that I've bullet pointed here, which is talking with our end users. And so there's a lot more evidence out there of the effectiveness of this approach of really talking with our end users. This is all before we start building anything. This isn't, I've delivered a workshop, now let me have a chat with you. It's very much talking with our end users, whether it's our learners, our stakeholders, whoever it may be, to deeply understand not just what they want, but what they might need, and also who they are. And when we map out empathy, we break down a lot of that stuff around the person. UX design, I've heard these are called desire paths. I'm just going to read the comments in case some of you are not on the chat. Make sure that we're all included. Anita, hi again. I'm starting to design a short online learning session. I have no experience in online programs. My work is experiential learning based and very much face-to-face, very active. Looking for tips and tricks from Leila and anyone willing to share. Fabulous, thank you. Let's keep that one in mind because we'll open it up for discussion shortly. So Anita is looking for any sort of hot tips or tricks to share them. Either use the chat box, or if there's an opportunity in our group conversation, we'd love to hear from you. Beautiful. And just to the point of UX design, that's a whole other session, but for anyone who is either vaguely familiar with UX design or hasn't heard of it, this all ties in. Everything all ties in, and design thinking is kind of the beginning of things, or the base concepts or the foundations. Oh, look at that group discussion. So for this piece, what I thought we'd do, we're not going to be able to very naturally emulate an in-person conversation, basically because we can't see each other's faces and wave in the air. But I'd love to use the chat box to for people to raise their hand or ask a question. I'll keep an eye on it, and I'll moderate. So I'll invite someone to, unmute and share their question or their thought. I put a couple of thinking questions up there. I'm not really attached to those. So we could probably kick off with, anything. Michael, did you want to elaborate on the comment you made around the desire paths? Did you want to share anything on that one?
Oh yeah, my partner's a bit big on that.
Go for it.
She always says that she read it somewhere. So yeah, that kind of idea where people will go where they want to go, rather than where they're designed to go, in a sense. So and then that's kind of reinforces what you were saying, really, I think. But considering what you were saying, like this discipline of empathy when creating learning, I'm facing this at the moment with something I'm designing for a digital space, and there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. So how do you empathise with someone who's inexperienced with with making decisions in a field they're not comfortable with? What are all the information, processes, things they have to understand, and how do we understand how they order them to be able to make a decision is very interesting to me.
It is. I mean, Bill has a comment. Bill, just one moment, because I just want to make sure that we've understood that thought. So you're saying you've got multiple end users that you're trying to understand?
Oh no, it's more of like the direction of the training that I'm writing digital for. There's a number of key decisions they have to make as they progress through a task, and they're all new to them, and they all involve different aspects, some of which are legislation, some of which are human.
Yeah.
So it's understanding the human.
Absolutely. Okay, I think I have understood what you're thinking there as well then. Yeah, absolutely. So that's where when we do empathy interviews or have empathy conversations, they're not questionnaires. They're generally a get to know you conversation where you practice just hearing with no judgment, and then you step away. And often effective empathy insight mapping occurs when you do it with another person. So you go off, you have the conversation with those humans, those individuals, and then you bring back the information to work with someone and map it into, well, what are their real fears? What are they really getting out of this? What is it that is driving them? What is it that's stopping them? And this is where you can get into the detail around empathy canvassing, empathy mapping, and then building insights out of that, which is all part of the design thinking. And that's probably something that, again, I get really excited about. It's getting to that next level of depth that we wouldn't get into in this particular session. However, if you like, it's something you. I will hand over to Bill. Please go ahead. You said you have a comment.
Yeah, just a couple of things, Leila. I've done a lot of work in the design thinking area over the last 20 years before it was even called design thinking, I think. But this whole idea of walking in the customer's shoes, seeing what they're doing is fundamental to continuous improvement and everything else. But recently I've gone a little bit further with that by sitting in on some webinars that one of our members has, Linda Box, where she's talked about accessibility. So not just empathizing with the customer and the user, but in some cases even the delivery. And so how do you make things accessible when you have people that have got vision impairment or things like that? And it's challenging to really get a handle on empathy to people that are quite different and struggle with different challenges and things like that. So I just wanted to make a comment about that, because it's more than just understanding the customer and what they want from a product. It's about really understanding the customer, and if they happen to be disabled people, blind, whatever it happens to be, there's a whole range of things that need to be taken into account. In fact, legally need to be taken into account. And on our ILP website there, Lyndall's webinar and things like that is up there for anybody that's interested in seeing how accessibility can be done through that process. So I just wanted to lay that in there for you.
Thank you, Bill. That's amazing. And absolutely, it was at the forefront of my mind for this session, which is why I decided to use slides quite heavily, not as in necessarily around disability or different abilities, but just that whole inclusivity of people who connect with information visually, or people who might connect in an audio sense. We don't have as much kinesthetic connecting with what we're doing when we're online, because our senses are so directed dimensionally. But I think what you've brought up is critical, especially if following the COVID crisis changes, we continue to operate more and more in this format. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And did you say that there's somewhere where there are some additional resources that people can look into for this?
I put it up on the chat box, and I'll put it up again if you like, but on the ILP website under resources, tools to survive and thrive, there's maybe 20 different offerings there. Look for the one on accessibility documents, and it shows live captioning and everything else that you're going through. It's really quite impressive. Gorgeous.
I'm going to repost that further into this chat right here in case anyone missed it further up. Thank you so much. I'm seeing a great conversation going on between Anita and Adele and a couple of other people. We'll emulate a coffee shop catch up and let that one carry on. That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Anything else that anybody would like to bring to the wider group around a question or a comment when we're talking about empathy in design? I have a bit of a question to put out there, and it's not a question that has an answer that I have in my mind, but I want us just to think for a minute about that that middle that middle speech bubble, where I've got this question that I often think about, which is, what difference does it make to our learner experience when we design with empathy first, as opposed to a traditional program-led, for example, approach to design? Who has any particular thoughts on that type of question? Or is there any difference?
I find that when we're looking at it from a user or a learner experience, then it's not just about what we learn within the course or the training, but it's how it's applied afterwards that I see a real key difference in the application of learning. People find the learning relevant and useful, and they take it on and then deliver it within their teams.
Yep, I like that. I've experienced that a little as well, where it's authentic. It feels more authentic, where it's been really built for them, not to necessarily tick a box. Thank you. I didn't catch your name.
Oh, that was Rebecca. Sorry, I've got my...
Hi. Oh, good. Nice to meet you. We've got context over content, absolutely, because we build for the context rather than for the content. I love that. I'm getting a lot of gems from you guys. I think you connect with the learner faster if you commence with empathy. Relevancy sticks. Yes, absolutely. That's all aligned in there. Thank you. And thank you also for everyone who's been giving Anita little steers as well. And then Michael's added, gives a sense early that you understand the perspective where they are starting or working in. Absolutely. what if we just didn't? What if all of this, what do they know? I mean, do we have any recent experiences in terms of, I guess, challenges around being able to design starting with our users? I know that I have a few, or have had. Are we all living the dream now?
I mean, I don't know if it answers your next question, but to your previous question as well, because sometimes when we're working with people who have very different experience to us, then it can be hard to build that trust. And I just think that if we lead with empathy, we're going to get that trust. And I've just been amazed by some of the conversations that we have in my training when I'm working with people who, come from such different backgrounds to me, and the conversations that come out are just so open and honest and really beautiful. We're really sort of able to drive that change by building that trust through the empathy.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't have. I'm not here to tell anyone, this is how it is. I love hearing these validating stories of where, empathy first actually gives a better experience and better outcomes for our end users. Does anyone have any, and this is not a question that's up on the actual slide, but you've made me think. I'm curious, does anybody have any examples where applying an empathy first approach has led to very happy stakeholders or bigger business outcomes? Putting you on the spot.
Leila, I can talk to that. A couple of roles ago, I had to create a customer service program. It's fairly easy to do. You can roll it out fairly effectively. But in order to do it, and I mean, I've got years of customer service training and experience and all those sorts of things, but I actually went and worked on the floor with the staff for, I think it was about 3 weeks all up. I remember doing every Saturday the lead up to Christmas, which was just insane. And it was just like, guys, I've been there, I'm living it, I'm breathing it. And the being able to share that information and saying, well, my experience when I was last on the floor last week, it actually made them just go, oh, she actually does understand. It's not coming high pedestal and I'm preaching to you. It's actually, no, I'm out there, I'm actually living and breathing this. And it wasn't something I just did at the start. I kept going back to it every 3 months and making sure that my experience was current and relevant and up to speed. And what that did was it made the learners actually go, well, you know what, it's worthwhile trying, because if it's making a difference here and here and here, we can actually now do it. And because she's doing it, we can do it. So the actual uptake from that program was extraordinary, which in turn turned into profit for the stores.
That's brilliant. I love that. And that's a fabulous example and an inspiring example as well. So thank you. And it's bringing to life that angle that when we approach empathy in design, the immersion angle, where we actually walk in our end users' shoes when creating something. So I love that. Thank you.
Hi, Leila. Hi, how you going? Good to see you there. You're at home and I'm in the office at Western Power. I've been involved in training people for eons because I'm older than dinosaurs, and I've got to tell you that because learning has changed so much for us over the years. In the beginning, we were the instructor, the teacher, the sensei, and your students sat and listened and learnt from you, and that was sort of learning literally by rote. That was the way we trained going back 30 years ago. and of course, as we've evolved now, we realise that we've got to bring people along for the journey. We've got to engage people, and to do that, the expectation, I think, for a lot of people, especially a lot of young people these days, is that it's a very personalised environment. You imagine sitting in front of YouTube, a YouTube tutorial, someone's putting on their makeup or showing you how to put together, a handiwork piece of, craft work or whatever. The people that are watching that are literally engaging one-on-one with that particular presenter. So even if you are in a room full of people or you're delivering online, it is being able to engage someone in a very personalised way. And the only way to do that is to get out and figure out who your target audience is before you even begin your prep. And that may be several different demographics. It might be several different interest levels, and certainly lots of different learning styles as well, but it takes a lot more effort than it used to put together robust learning experiences for people these days. You have to be a lot smarter, and it's not a cookie cutter event anymore. So we have changed, and with that means that people like myself have to come along for the journey and learn how to communicate differently when we're educating people.
Yeah, thank you. Vanessa, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Hi. You didn't pop up, so I just wanted to.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, so we have someone else we have at least 3 people from WA on the line. That's always exciting. Thank you for that. That's a really that's a really succinct, packaged example of what we're getting at here when we talk about that whole empathy first is really understanding who we're building for. And given that our learners, our users are getting younger, their expectations are changing more and more. So absolutely. I don't know if anyone's heard of TikTok. If you think 7 minutes of a YouTube tutorial are too short, you can now actually learn from TikTok, where you have about 30, it's an app. And for anyone who hasn't got it, I don't recommend it because it's a little bit addictive. But you've got chefs on. There's a lot of tomfoolery on there. But when I put my learning and development hat on, you've got people on there teaching exercise moves. You have about I think it's like 20 seconds or something per clip. So there are people teaching exercise moves. There are chefs teaching short recipes. You've got some doctors on there giving health tips. A lot of dancing, which I find very entertaining. But the thing is, that's another evolution of the shortening attention span. So I mean, this is stuff that we're all aware of. But just if anyone hasn't heard of TikTok, just don't download it. Just Google it and at least find out what it is, because it's becoming more and more diffused. So yeah, thank you for Vanessa for bringing that up. I love that. Christmas party gold. I'm just looking at the chat. So I might shuffle over and share with you next a very recent example of how I adapted empathy in online design and delivery in my current role. So it's all happened in the last 3 weeks. Now, this slide is full of words. I'm very aware of that, and I tend to not do this, but because I was conscious of the possible connectivity issues and whatnot, but I'll just put it all on a slide in words so that if anyone has audio issues, at least they can read it. So it's very opposite to how I would normally use slides, as you probably guessed from the previous slides. So I'm apologizing for this. So a recent real life short example, and I won't call it a case study because I'm only really, there's about 3 or 4 dot points in there, of what worked recently for practicing empathy in a digital environment was I basically, in my role, I also design and develop short workshops on a need-by-need basis. And this was a particular workshop that I was delivering, that I had a remit, some objectives, all the basic stuff. And it was a workshop that was being developed just before, I think it was right at the beginning. Basically, it was never going to be a face-to-face workshop based on current environment. So here are that's about as much context, I think, that won't bore you. But in terms of some of the things that I did and didn't do, I actually didn't request feedback sheets following the first session delivery of this online learning. So instead, I replaced those feedback sheets with 15-minute interviews or conversations. I didn't call them interviews because that sounds too formal. 15-minute conversations with a sample of 5 different participants. 3 of them had actually attended that session, and 2 were possible participants for a future session. So I didn't just stick to the people who'd come to that particular session. And I really just listened and captured their feelings, their thoughts, ideas, what they took out of it, what they did afterwards, which someone brought up earlier is, you know, a bit of a testament to empathy, and of course really try to understand them with their beliefs and drivers. I got so much gold from those short conversations, and it was just almost an hour and a half's worth of my time, and really worth it, bang for buck. So my lesson from that one is just talk with your users or your learners, particularly if they're your end users, throughout their full journey. So before, during, after, and I also like to say beyond, so that it doesn't end with a session. Bit controversial, but in the context of empathy in design, happy sheets are a little bit of a box ticking exercise most of the time. And from my experience over the years, because I'm not older than dinosaurs, but I have been doing this for like a good 10 years. These sheets rarely lead to meaningful improvements or a deep understanding of learners' unknown needs. And so I just, you know, use the key insights from the empathy conversations, and I use them to formulate a simple approach to the next session. Now, I had discovered from the users, from my learners, that they needed more time to absorb new information. And these are really smart people. I work with clever people, but with everything that's going on, you know, a lot of them told me stories about what's going on at home, what else is going on at work, competing priorities. They just needed more time to absorb new information. And so I tested on the next session, I tested a staggered pre-learning approach with the next round of human beings. And it involved a few things, but a couple I wanted to share was it involved bite-sized reflection questions, kept it at reflection, that they didn't even have to send back to me, so that their accountability was theirs. And also a couple of choices or options for research questions. And I call it exploration, and that's often the fun part of learning. So my screen has frozen, so I'm unable to see the chat box, but I'll continue and I'll find it in just a moment. Learning from that is that, and this anchors back to something Vanessa said just before as well, is that the online event is no longer the learning event. It really cannot be the learning event anymore, that online event. So this is something that we talk about a lot, and I got to experience it in the last 2 or 3 weeks, which is that now more than ever, we have to embrace what adult learners need in order to learn. And this is some of the stuff that's, you know, been said today, and this has been my experience, that, you know, we need to build stuff. We find out through empathy conversations that it's empowerment. Adult learners need to have self-sufficiency. There needs to be a level of self-paced learning there. However, clear objectives. I like to take a seek and ye shall find approach when I'm putting something together. And you know what? Short, sharp, interesting subjects. I just saw the chat, Debbie. Hashtag eliminate the happy sheet. We'll have another meetup for that one. And then another important learning I'd love to share is that in those, and I did more empathy conversations with the second group as well. I didn't just stop at one iteration. And that's a design thinking principle, that you just keep iterating and improving. Learners had mostly expressed that they had digital fatigue. Now, I suspect it's, at the moment, a lot of us do, but even so, it would be the case for a lot of online or remote learning. So I iterated the following session to actually minimize screen time. Despite everyone being in different remote locations, at my workplace, we are split into 2 rosters because we're considered almost emergency services. We keep the lights on, and so half the team of the whole organization is working from home while the other half works in the office, and every 2 weeks we switch over. So anything we're delivering has to be agnostic of your location. And so, you know, we've evolved, or it ended up doing a lot of online stuff. So what I did was gave people a lot of prescribed activities where they were invited to just hang up on the online meeting and call each other or communicate with each other any way they liked. And my learning from that I'm sharing is that just use whatever features of technology that you have on hand. So whether that's video, visual, audio, chat boxes, imagery, PowerPoints, Jiffies, good old telephones, anything that offers people other options to engage with themselves, each other, and with you. And so I just thought I'd, keep that summary of those sort of 3 things from, very recent example. And I have got one more down there, and it's right at the bottom of the slide. So if you can't see it, I'd love to share this one because this is quite personal. For anyone here who is frequently facilitating or presenting, you might have found, I know I've found this significantly, that facilitating online means that I can't read my room and my audience like I'm experienced to do in person. And so one approach I've taken successfully to that is I've just reduced allocated workshop time, basically. So when I say allocated, people expect a 2-hour session, doesn't need to go for 2 hours. I've reduced allocated workshop time when I've been designing, doing the plans. And I've used that space or that time to engage individually and uniquely with my participants. So by building that connection one-on-one with participants, it's actually helped them and helped me to connect outside of the time that we come together collectively. And it has reduced greatly, I call it the hammy hands feeling that you have when you're talking into a camera, or I call it a vacuum sometimes because I don't know who's responding or how they're responding. And so that's probably more of a overall learning that I've, figured out, adapted, tested, and I'm going to roll with in terms of my approach to building online stuff ongoing, really, on top of all of that. I know that was quite a lot, so back over to you. And now I can see the chat box again. So we've got probably about 5 minutes or so for some more hearing from yourselves. After this, I'll just share a couple of, further reading for you if you're interested, and then I'll hand over to Bill. But we do have, we've got about 5 minutes or so if anyone wants to tell us a little bit about something they've experienced that we can pinch. Adele is finding 90-minute sessions are ideal for virtual workshops, combined with providing learners with homework. I love that, yeah. It's good to hear this. I.e. reading, skills, practice activities, etc. to do in between. With one of her workshops, Adele is providing individual participant coaching via email and Zoom in between virtual group sessions, 90 minutes or less. I love that. Where I worked before, I was at Bankwest here in WA. Our learning team tested an entire 3-week tele-induction on a digital learning environment, and they did test pieces of this. So I've seen it. I've seen some of this in action, and it can be quite exhausting for the facilitators, but it's well worth it in the end. We're on the same page at 4:48. Beck said, for general public webinars, I let the participants decide. Beck, do you mind hopping back on the mic and elaborating on that one, if you can?
Sorry, it was just I made a comment before that if I'm running webinars and I'm doing it for internal training, then I'll ask everyone who's involved to have their cameras on so that we can see each other and engage with each other visually. But if it's just a general webinar and I'm just running it sort of for public, that's a bit different. I'll let people decide. But yeah, if it's a work one, an internal work, I'll have the cameras on.
Gorgeous, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to, I wasn't sure what piece of the trail that belonged to. Absolutely. And I think that option and that choice is really important in general. So it's wonderful that you're also, you know, practicing that. I read a HBR article that was really short, funnily enough. I don't read long articles. And it talked about, again, the fatigue of being digital and being online. And there's this, sometimes you just switch the camera off so that you can actually listen and engage. Having the cameras on all the time can actually impede that engagement and concentration, and also again comes that physical eye fatigue. So it's nice to have choices as well. 90 minutes is sufficient. I think we're all a lot of us are on the same page when we're thinking about bite-sized and modular style approaches. We offer pre-reading for those who want to dig deeper, for conversational points during the workshop, or pre-watching. Absolutely, get them on TikTok. Getting lots of tips here. Thanks, everyone. Oh, that's wonderful to hear, Anita. Absolutely. Totally agree. That's great. Neil has 6 3-hour sessions per week across 3 separate diploma units for accredited training. That's a tougher one, accredited training, isn't it, Neil? He spends most of his time doing small group work, one-on-one, tutoring, role plays, observations. Yeah, absolutely. Neil, if you're comfortable hopping on the mic, do you want to share with us any particular challenge and how you've overcome it around this, if you feel like it? Thank you, Michael, for those other tips in there, tactile things. And you've got big classes, 41, 55, 28. That's hefty.
Leila, I have something you could offer if I have a moment.
Sorry, Bill?
I have something I could offer on this. If you...
Yes, please. Absolutely.
One of the things we've been talking about in one of the other ILP webinars we've been running is the definition or understanding around different ways of presenting online. And one of the things we came up with was that there are things we call a webinar, which the way we were looking at it is mostly a speaker presenting some material to a group of people with a little bit of chat interaction potentially, but basically it's a presentation style. The second thing we had was what we would call, and these are just the terms that I've been using, a virtual classroom, where we actually have the training process going on, and there's breakout rooms and polls, and there's a range of other things like that. And so the interaction there is quite different. With the webinar, you probably don't need to have videos on at all, and the speaker barely needs to be seen because it's very PowerPoint driven in many cases or whatever. Ian Pereira on our website did a brilliant, stunning slides process on how to put a good interactive webinar together using that approach. The masterclass or the virtual classroom is that idea of interaction, getting people to do things, etc. And then we had the last one, which is basically just the online meetup, which is people together in a room having a conversation around things. Maybe there's an agenda, maybe there isn't. But in that case, everybody's on video because it's really a personal thing. And so we're seeing different styles. And one of the things I encourage people to do is think about what is it they're trying to accomplish with the people they are, and then that way they can manage the participants.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. I'm going to hit enter again on the link to the ILP tools to survive and thrive. So just in case a few people have joined since, or they just want to remember that link. I'm going to flick over to Neil just to share, because he managed to get onto the audio while we were waiting just then. Go for it, Neil.
Yeah, well, these students I were face-to-face with about 2 months ago. And because of the situation, we've had to move online. Another issue that I've got is some of the students I've got have actually gone back to their home countries. So I have timing issues. I have a guy in Chile waking up at 3:30 in the morning to come to his class from 6 o'clock till 9 o'clock at night, Brisbane time. I've also got issues that a lot of them have very low bandwidth where they live. So I don't actually get to see their faces all the time. So we're all learning as each day goes by, but total hours I spent in front of a screen last week was 75, which is not doing my headspace very well, but I did get through with all the students, all the observations that they had to do, because there were 2 observations in relation to one of the units that we do in breakout rooms.
Okay, using the technology you have there.
Because we don't have a chance. They have visa limitations on them. They can't stay here forever. They can't get out of the country. We have to provide a service that they've already paid for.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Neil. I like to also note that, it's not all roses, so that, these are the challenges that you continue to work on. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've all been absolutely amazing. It's been such an honor just being together, and I feel like I've learnt a few new things as well. Before I flick back over to Bill to wrap us up and tell us what's next, here are a couple of further reading if anyone is interested. There's so much out there on design thinking, and agile and sprinting and all this stuff here. If you like books and you want something a little bit interesting, here are a couple of The Design of Everyday Things is a real pleasant read, and then Sprint is another easy to read. You can tell I don't like long reading things. I like easy. So these are the suggestions you'll get from me. They're not very academic. So I just thought I'd chuck those in there, and just, remember that if you want to, learn more, you've got the ILP website, and you've also, Google is amazing when it comes to anything to do with design thinking, because everything in design thinking is so generous and out there that you can actually find a lot of free stuff and a lot of self-paced learning. So thank you, and thank you for this. There's one more comment. Many teachers in the vet space have been surprised by students' capacity to adapt and carry on. Beautiful, positive, thank you. And Kerry's daughters at uni and surprised in the differences of various lecturers adapting. And again, there's that variety. So I'm going to close right there, because I'm very conscious of all of your times. And I'll hand over to you, Bill, if you'd like to close us off.
Thank you, Leila, and thank you very much for a very, very interesting presentation and things like that. Design thinking begins with the user and understanding what it is they're doing. Empathy is something that we as learning and development people have to hold and grasp, and I think we do that, and you've given us some great tips for that, so thank you for that. As far as everyone else goes, thank you for participating with us today. Kerry and I have been doing a lot of different things together to create a member engagement, and you're going to see a number of things coming through in the next little while, including things like a members forum, a members academy, as well as other things. We're also holding these meetups every 2 weeks of this style. The one we're doing in 2 weeks from now is going to be a little bit different in the sense that it's a master class. So it's a 3-hour master class with Julie Mason, who's one of the top people on the use of LinkedIn to promote your business and other things like that. So she's a real professional. So have a look at that on the ILP website, and I put the URL up there for you. Have a look at that and see what you come along. We've also then got a members lounge. So these are very informal. It's just whoever comes in. We need you to register so we can send you the links, and all of that's under events on the ILP website. So we have a members lounge set for different times. We're trying different times to see who can come in. The 15th of May, the 20th, the 27th. So we're doing something every week. And even I noticed today up under the events on the ILP website that Brisbane is starting to think ahead already. and they've actually started to schedule some face-to-face meetups, which we'll get back to in all of our different regions. So there's a lot of things happening. Stay tuned. If you're a member, you'll see a lot of things coming through. If you're not, please register with us or even think about joining up, because it's just got a lot of great stuff going on at the moment, and we're looking forward to working with you. So that's all from me. Carrie, did you want to say anything before we finish up?
I'm just remembering to unmute myself. No, that's about it, Bill. There's lots of things happening, particularly the Members Lounge. It's at this time, it's really important for people to stay connected and touch base, and it is totally informal. There's no selling. It's just a chance to touch base and ask for help, or just to chat, basically. So it's been really good chatting with members through these sessions. I just saw a message from someone saying any chance of practical session to hear what development software people are using. We have been doing a bit of research. There's actually something up on that site or that page that Bill's been mentioning a few times on how to choose the right tools. So it's up there, but we've also got a session that we're planning on the virtual presentation. So keep an eye out for that as well, and Bill will be scheduling that shortly. That's it from me. Thank you everyone for joining this afternoon, and please stay safe and take care. I look forward to talking with you soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks, Leila.